you're doing with Tina Cross, Susan and yourself, I just think that you are I just can't get over what the Lady Killers are doing right now with harmonies. You've got to go on and just 100% love it.
Thank you very much.
Now,
well, we collect songs and, do them up with harmony. So, it's a habit.
Have you heard the Lady Killers, Mihi?
oh my gosh, she's been doing that for like decades. She's been doing the harmonising thing for decades. She's a star. But I think that Chris Finlayson, I think everyone's got a collection in their house somewhere. And Chris, you've probably got a collection of treaty settlements.
No, I was collecting golf balls over the holiday.
Mihi Ngāngari Forbes and Chris Finlayson, thank you very much. Jackie, you too. Checkpoint next.
This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Now, haere nei, cows could go hungry and crops to waste if farmers can't get heavy machinery operators into the country. Despite government promises to allow 200 in-demand workers over the border, they're still screaming out for MIQ spots. Day one back in class and an Auckland school is already dealing with a COVID scare. National wants twice weekly rapid antigen tests for students and staff. The government's bought 36 million more, so who's going to get them and when? The Omicron bogey forces the cancellation of the New Zealand Golf Open, and the plague of starlings and the punami raining down on a Christchurch street. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook, Freeview Channel 50 and Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. The government's boosting its COVID-19 rapid antigen test stock, confirming an extra 36 million tests to be delivered over the next 2 months. That includes 22 million tests announced last week, which officials are yet to receive a delivery schedule for. Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson says New Zealanders will have access to more than 55 million tests by the end of March.
An additional 87 million rapid antigen tests have been ordered through to June, which will allow for regular and widespread testing to occur. In total, 123 million rapid antigen tests are on order, and work continues to bring these orders forward.
Grant Robertson says modelling suggests 9 million rapid antigen tests will be used a week at the peak of the Omicron outbreak. A COVID-19 modeller says infections in the community are moving slightly slower than they have in overseas Omicron outbreaks. But University of Canterbury professor Michael Planck warns case numbers could still take off. 126 new infections were reported in 11 regions today. The Ministry of Health believes Omicron is now the dominant variant. Michael Planck says daily cases are about 4 times higher than a week ago and continuing to rise, with a doubling time of about 4 days.
That's at the slower end of Omicron outbreaks that we've seen in other countries. And so hopefully that's a sign of our public health measures doing the job that they're intended to do, which is to slow down the spread of the virus. So, cases are clearly trending upwards, but we've got to try and keep that growth rate limited.
There was a new record high of 79 cases at the border today. Pregnant journalist Charlotte Bellis has been granted a spot in MIQ. Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson says the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment today offered her a voucher and flight arrangements from Afghanistan, where she took refuge after failing to secure a bed. He says her case doesn't mean you'll get preferential treatment if you're overseas and make a fuss. Mr Robertson says MB staff are handling difficult and challenging cases on a daily basis. New figures on the extent on abuse in the Catholic Church have been called horrifying, startling and sobering. They show 1,100 survivors laid almost 1,700 complaints against priests, nuns and religious orders since 1950. Survivor Steve Goodlass says it's the tip of the iceberg, but proves abuse has been as bad here as elsewhere.
Now we actually get to see the bigger picture, how pervasive abuse was within the Catholic Church. Council for the Catholic Church made a plea to consider that the New Zealand situation would be different from elsewhere in the world. And I think it's patently clear that it's the same.
Steve Goodlass says the Church's release of the data should embarrass it into providing better redress. The Children's Commissioner says more work is needed to reduce disparities for Māori in the youth justice system. A new report shows the number of youth offenders has fallen by more than 60% over the past decade. The number of Māori offenders halved between 2017 and 2021, but offending rates are 6 times higher for Māori than for non-Māori. Frances Ivers says more needs to be done to avoid rangatahi entering the adult justice system. She says it involves enabling whānau and Māori providers. West Coasters are being encouraged to prepare for heavy rain. Bulla Mayor Jamie Klein says people should start monitoring official civil defence channels with the worst of the weather expected from midday Wednesday.
Start thinking about, a getaway bag or where you might, what emergency supplies you might need and obviously think about where you might head if the call was to come to evacuate at some point.
Met Service has issued a red warning which is reserved for the most extreme storms. Emergency operations centres have opened in Westport and Hokitika. And now to sport. Organisers of the New Zealand Golf Open have had to backtrack on their decision to hold the tournament this year. The event was due to tee off at Millbrook in Arrowtown next month, but has been cancelled, with tournament chair John Hart saying it's too difficult to run under the COVID red light setting. The tournament was also cancelled last year due to COVID. Hart says after stating in December the tournament would go ahead, it's devastating to have to reverse that decision.
We had an understanding of how we'd be able to get our players in, how we'd be able to potentially self-isolate. Subsequent to us making that announcement, in fairness to the government, they then closed the borders and border restrictions, and of course since then have implemented the red light system, which makes it impossible for us to hold an event of the nature of the New Zealand Open.
John Hart says they remain committed to the event going ahead next year. Sarah Ulmer's national individual pursuit record set nearly 20 years ago has been broken by Auckland rider Bryony Botha. Ulmer set a world record in the 3,000 metres individual pursuit at the Athens Olympics in 2004. That time stood as a world mark until 2010, but has lasted for 18 years as the national record. And that's the news.
Spinning the MIQ wheel.
MIQ, as it stands, is a blunt instrument. We want it to be fixed. Kiwis are not able to get home. 2+ years into a pandemic.
Calls for a truce.
We want the government to do the right thing. The MIQ system is just a debacle. There's no reason why an announcement can't happen immediately.
There are no winners.
Get me out of here. From the minute I arrived with my 2 boys, you just feel like you're walking into a prison.
It's down to the wire. Morning reports, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with Lisa Owen and Checkpoint shortly, but right now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Significant heavy rain for the South Island's west coast starting tomorrow is expected. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo, often cloudy with a few showers or drizzle patches. For Waikato, Waitomo, Taumarunui and Taranaki, fine and cloudy periods, the chance of a light shower. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, also Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine and hot with high cloud at times. Marlborough and Nelson, cloud increasing, rain developing tomorrow, possibly heavy later. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, also the headwaters of Canterbury and Otago lakes and rivers. Cloud increasing with rain developing late today. Heavy rain and thunderstorms for most places tomorrow, but especially Westland, then in Bulla from the afternoon. For the remainder of Canterbury and Otago, also Southland, cloudy periods, scattered rain developing tonight, possible thunderstorms tomorrow afternoon and evening for Southland and Clutha. And for the Chatham Islands, mainly fine. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. 2 weeks. That's the deadline a rural contractor is setting the government to follow through with their December promise to allow 200 skilled machinery operators into the country to help with the busy autumn harvest. Since then, not a single worker has managed to secure an MIQ spot because of the Omicron response. It comes as the government announces it's got a voucher for pregnant journalist Charlotte Ballas in MIQ and has urged her to travel from Afghanistan to take it. And Brooke Nettleton from Bluegrass Contracting in Waikato says if workers don't arrive in the country within the next fortnight, crops will deteriorate to a point farmers will not be able to milk their cows. Now, Brooke joins me live now. Kia ora, Brooke. How many workers were you hoping to get in?
We were hoping to sort of get between 5 and 10 if we could.
And where would they come from?
They would have been coming from Scotland, Ireland, England, wherever abroad they were wanting to come from.
And so, where's the bottleneck? What is the issue?
Well, basically, we've been fighting this since August of last year, and then we tried to go it alone to get workers in under critical workers, and got knocked back because we were told that we weren't critical enough. And so, obviously, then it sort of started when we all ended up having a meeting in our depot back in November, I think it was. A few local contractors, we all got together and started to make a bit of noise, and then obviously the rural contractors and federated farmers went to the government, and then they came up with the announcement that they were going to allow us to have 200 overseas workers back on the 12th or 14th of December.
So how many workers have you got in the country since they made that promise to you?
Haven't got any, not one single worker.
And where does that leave you?
Well, basically, we're probably 2 weeks away from one of the biggest harvests of the year, the maize silage in the Waikato. And it's going to put pressure on not just us, everybody in this industry and farmers as well. So,
how so with the farmers, Brooke? Explain the trickle-down effect to me, please.
Well, basically, with maize silage, it needs to come off at a certain dry matter or a certain ME or however people want to decide that their crop's ready. And you basically have a 7-day window, sometimes 14 days. And so if it starts to deteriorate or you can't get there in that time frame, it starts dropping in quality, which can equate to, a milk solid per ME, if you like to say. So if it starts to drop 5 ME, all of a sudden a farm, this stuff that would be producing milk solids and milk every day is going to become winter feed or conditioner. So it's real serious.
So the cow's production will deteriorate depending on the quality of the crop, and if you don't harvest it soon enough, it's all downhill from there.
100%.
So tell me, what is the cost of bringing a worker in for you guys?
Basically, we have to pay towards their flights. We have to pay for MIQ, and depending on the original scheme back last year was we had to pay them while they were in MIQ. So we estimate probably around about somewhere between $8,000 and $9,000 per worker.
But you simply cannot get, despite the government's promises, spots in MIQ for these people.
No, we can't. And we've obviously had people lined up since way back in October, and then we had this announcement in December, and I notified them all and said, looking good. Let's keep in touch. Hopefully you're here in early January, and they were all still on board. Now we're down to 1 or 2 workers, basically, because they've all... Well, I couldn't promise them that anything was going to happen. We couldn't get any answers. So I've moved on and ended up finding jobs at home because they've all been hanging on the end of the string, wanting to come to New Zealand. And some of these guys are people that have worked for us in the past for 3 or 4 years, driving harvesters, and we're going to come and stay here, but they've gone.
A couple of things, Brooke. Where would you put these workers to self-isolate if they came in the next couple of weeks, given the pressure on MIQ? Have you got somewhere for them?
Yes, so we've obviously got a 9 or 10 bedroom house as above our yard that we use for overseas staff. It's empty because we haven't got any overseas staff, and so I had a suggestion that they could self-isolate in there for the given time that they needed, and basically, we could have either got click and collect or food, delivered to the house, and then they could have gone from there, and they could have been totally self-isolated.
Sean, what is the problem with employing New Zealanders? Why can't they fill these jobs?
I think the biggest problem is they don't want to work the hours, and they don't want to work in the weekends, because it's a 7-day-a-week operation, and we have to roster people on that. You might end up, if you have 2 wet days during the week, you might end up working Saturday and Sunday, and they just don't want to do it. The ones that want to do it are great, and we'd employ Kiwis all day long.
Is the pay good, Brooke? Give us an example of how much you get paid.
Well, basically, if you want to work, you're going to sort of earn anywhere from 70 to 90,000 a year.
So on Thursday, Brooke, when the Prime Minister is expected to make an announcement about MIQ, what do you need and how soon?
Well, we need them here. They need to be on a plane within a week to 10 days, really, because if they have to do 2 weeks of MIQ, we really need them here by the end of February at the very latest.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That's Brooke Nettleton from Bluegrass Contracting in Waikato. Desperate, he says, to get heavy machinery operators in before, harvest goes to waste. Now, we invited Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor on the program to talk about the shortage of heavy machinery operators, but he declined. We're expecting a statement from him, and we'll bring that to you as soon as we get it. We also invited the Deputy Prime Minister, Grant Robertson, on the show, but he wasn't available to be interviewed either. Associate Health Minister Aisha Verrall was also not available to speak to Checkpoint about supplies of rapid antigen tests. And just to round it out, we invited the Housing Minister, Megan Woods, on the program to talk about the OECD's recommendations for our overheated housing market. Her office declined and directed us back to Grant Robertson, who, as we say, declined to be interviewed. We'll keep trying. I urge her to take it, the message from the Deputy Prime Minister to pregnant journalist Charlotte Ballas after announcing she's been given a place in MIQ. Ms Ballas is in Afghanistan and had been denied an emergency MIQ room. Her case garnered international attention after she said the Taliban had offered her safe harbour while she couldn't get back to New Zealand. Grant Robertson says government officials have been working with her and have offered her a voucher and flight arrangements. He says the staff who process emergency applications deal with challenging cases on a daily basis.
That has been consistently what they have been doing over the last couple of weeks to support Ms Ballas through the application process, and in each circumstances the specific set of circumstances that a person faces is taken into account. So in that regard, Ms Ballas is no different.
Grant Robertson says he appreciates the process of applying for an emergency room can be frustrating.
Because we have an understanding that there are medical situations, there are personal situations that need exemptions, we have emergency allocations. Then there is a process to go through those. I appreciate for people that it can feel bureaucratic or it can feel frustrating, but that's because MB is dealing with so many different applications. In the case of Ms Ballas, there is now a place for her in MIQ.
Grant Robertson wouldn't comment on whether or not the government breached Ms Ballas's privacy by sharing publicly details of her case. It is 17 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai e haere nei. Coming up, national calls for twice weekly rapid antigen tests for students and teachers. It's day one, case one for an Auckland high school that's already dealing with an infected staff member just as students return to the classroom. But Otahuhu College principal says it's time schools learnt to live with COVID and got on with the job of educating kids. Meanwhile, other schools spoken to by Checkpoint have reported high attendance rates for what was the first day back for many. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
Day one back on the books at Otahuhu College, and already news of an unwelcome guest making its way through the school gates.
Would have been nice to have had the first day without it, but that's just the way it is, and so it's just a matter of making sure we've got plans in place, doing the best we can.
A staff member infected with Omicron is now isolating, along with 3 close contacts.
They were at school last week, but they had limited interactions with with staff, and we've identified the close contacts. They've been asked to isolate, and we're just waiting to hear back from Auckland Public Health.
But this is barely a surprise. Get used to it, because COVID-19 is coming to the classroom. And Principal Neil Watson says the school has done its homework. Masks are a must, isolation plans in place, imminent absences accounted for. And the students certainly don't seem bothered about being back.
We had a good turnout of Year 9s, despite the news last night, which the families got sent. So I think that probably illustrates that people accept that we've got to live with the pandemic. We've got to make sure we follow the guidelines, but other than that, it's making sure we do the best job we can for the kids, and the kids do the best job they can at school too.
If last year was the year of going online, 2022 is the year of getting on with it, in Mr Watson's eyes, even if testing times may be ahead.
Yeah, get on with it. We're going to have a great year. Students are going to do really well. They'll be really enthused, as they always are at the start, and then it's a matter of keeping that motivation going for the whole year and doing well in their exams in November. Pretty simple.
Meanwhile, back to school's never been so cool. Down the road at Papatoetoe High School, students stoked to swap dining tables for school desks after a disrupted 2021 that included a cluster of cases connected to the college.
Yeah, I'm just happy to see my friends and stuff. Yeah, very lonely at home.
I think they're happy to be out of home and not in congested places anymore. They're just happy to see their friends and
I think it's okay. Nothing bad's gonna happen. Everyone's really happy. Everyone seems happy.
Principal Vaughan Quio says the numbers show the vast majority of families are more than happy sending their teenagers back to class.
Our attendance rate is really solid for this time of year. It's really good, and so it is a clear indicator that people want to be out of the house and back getting on with business as usual. And it was a really good vibe around the grounds today. Really good.
One staff member picked up the virus while overseas during the break, but they're now deemed an historic case due to leave isolation tomorrow.
We've been through the ringer before. We've got some really good systems and processes in place. And the first thing is to keep calm. We look after the people that we need to, do some identification of some close contact stuff. And I think we'll be able to move faster than the Ministry of whatever else will be able to move. And so it really will be incumbent on my team of grown-ups to do some identification and help sorting out how to protect who we can. If we need to, we'll roster home this or close down that, but that would need to be significant numbers.
One way to avoid those significant disruptions, those elusive rapid antigen tests, particularly, Quio says, for his staff.
Wouldn't it be great if we had some close contacts who every day I knew they were negative so they could come to work for that day? I just think it would be better, particularly in the education workforce, anything that's a public good, be that the fire service, the health service, education. If we could test to work in our setting, that would be great too.
Rapid antigen tests or not, as day one draws to a close, the kids tell us they're keen for Red's relative normality to remain.
I think book work's much easier than computer work, and I work better when I communicate with others.
Everyone's just trying to get on with their life, They've got stuff to do, everyone has stuff. So, trying to get on with their normal daily lives.
Returning to class seemingly more popular than it's ever been.
And the video for that story from Our 2 Next will go up on our webpage. Do check it out. The government's announced a big shipment of rapid antigen tests has been secured and will be here in the next 2 months. The Deputy Prime Minister, Grant Robertson, says they've secured an additional 36 million tests on top of the 17 million already confirmed for delivery in February and the 5 million already in the country. He says rapid antigen tests will be used more frequently as Omicron cases increase.
Modelling on the use of rapid antigen tests through the outbreak suggests that during the peak we will likely be using 9 million rapid antigen tests a week, which is the equivalent to testing a quarter of New Zealand every day or all of New Zealand twice a week. That scale of testing will go a long way to reducing the risk of an infected person going to work and infecting others, and will help with keeping critical services and supply chains open and moving.
National says it wants to see rapid antigen tests handed out to school kids and teachers twice a week as Omicron circulates in the community. It's also renewed its call for an end to MIQ, saying the system is no longer needed with COVID in the community. Our political reporter Annika Smith has the story from National's caucus retreat in Queenstown.
Literally, there's just not enough customers for the model, and you have to have so many staff.
Christopher Luxon hearing firsthand from Queenstown businesses doing it tough in the pandemic. The skies are blue and the weather balmy on the second day of National's caucus retreat, but streets in this resort town are quiet. Local businesses are struggling and fearful of what tomorrow and the future holds.
This is no longer a health crisis, it's an economic crisis, it's also a social crisis.
Staring down without having a wage subsidy or resurgent support, it's looking at a very fast cliff of danger, big losses.
It's a place that relies on overseas foot traffic more than most. National says the border should immediately open up to fully vaccinated New Zealanders, then critical workers and vaccinated tourists. National's COVID-19 response spokesperson Chris Bishop says MIQ just doesn't make sense anymore.
A lot of people would say MIQ made sense when we ran elimination as a strategy. At the start of the pandemic, we didn't know what we were dealing with. What we did know about it was, pretty scary, and we ran that elimination strategy and it worked, and MIQ was broadly supported then. Most people said, yeah, fair enough. But now, with Omicron sweeping the world and in New Zealand, the balance at the border is wrong.
National also wants to make rapid antigen tests widely available in your local pharmacy or supermarket. It wants schools to have enough supplies to do twice-weekly surveillance testing for students, teachers and staff. With about 800,000 students in New Zealand, this policy would put significant pressure on the country's stocks. Mr Luxon hadn't run these numbers before announcing the proposal, but stands by it.
The reality is it's very simple to do. Other jurisdictions are doing it. Why is it acceptable to do it in New South Wales and not New Zealand?
Mr Luxon is clear he wants New Zealand's pandemic response brought into line with countries like Australia and the UK. Both of these countries are seeing daily death rates in the dozens and daily case infections in the tens of thousands. Mr Luxon says the world has moved on, and so should New Zealand.
Well, I guess my bigger point is that we fundamentally are still thinking about this Omicron crisis with an old mindset. We're thinking about how we did it with Delta and how we did it in 2020. And my challenge to you is saying we can't carry on the way we're going. The risk has fundamentally changed.
National's caucus retreat wrapped up in Queenstown today with a talk from former All Black coach Sir Steve Hansen. He wouldn't weigh in on National's performance heading into the speech, only to say it's a good thing the party wants to learn from others.
The thing that's impressed me so far is that we've got a political party that's flexible enough and broad-minded enough to ask other people how they do things, and look, we didn't get it always right in the All Blacks, but happy to share our thoughts and they can do with it what they like.
Ask Steve Hansen. Changing a losing team to a winning one starts with recognising strengths and weaknesses and setting expectations for performance. Christopher Luxon has made it clear he wants his caucus focused on their portfolios and on the ground with constituents. In his own words, it's now game on for the National Party.
Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Should schools be using rapid antigen tests and testing students and teachers? And what do we do about the squeeze MIQ is putting on the rural sector? Where are those, farmers supposed to get critical farm workers from? Pātui mai, text me 2101, tweet us at checkpoint.rnz, or you can send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. New figures show 1 in 7 Catholic clergy who work for a bishop have had abuse complaints laid against them. The Catholic Church has for the first time publicly released the figures, which show the scale of sexual and other abuse across the country since 1950. The Royal Commission into Abuse says the numbers are startling, while a Catholic cardinal describes them as horrifying. Phil Pennington reports.
It is the first time the Catholics have comprehensively collated the scale of abuse, done at the request of the Royal Commission. That's involved dozens of people searching paper files dating back 70 years in hundreds of places. These show 1,122 survivors laid almost 1,700 complaints, largely against priests, brothers and nuns. About half were over sexual abuse and 80% involved children. The worst of the 6 accused abusers each had more than 15 complaints laid against them, and another 50 had more than 5 complaints against them. Almost 600 of those accused were named, and about a third faced multiple complaints. Cardinal John Dew, president of the Catholic Bishops' Conference, says the facts show the sad reality.
They do represent terrible stories, and it's something that, as I say, we're horrified at the extent and ashamed of it.
Of all the complaints, almost 380 were laid against 182 clergy who work under a bishop. That's 14% of them, or 1 in 7 diocesan priests. In Australia, by contrast, abuse was worst among religious orders of brothers. Dew says that's a surprising finding in this country, but that the screening for the priesthood and training for celibacy are better now. But a survivor of abuse at a church school, Steve Goodless of Central Otago, calls it chilling.
The orders no longer take part in teaching, so their access has been drastically cut. But the diocesan priests still exist. That actually becomes a really chilling aspect because we've got to look at safeguarding today.
The 14% of diocesan priests complained against compares with complaints against 8% of brothers or priests who work for a congregation. That's 599 complaints against 187 of them, and against just 3% of nuns or sisters since 1950. The Royal Commission calls the data startling and sobering. However, though the report does show the Church paid out almost $17 million just on 500 survivors over the decades, it does not say how many perpetrators were dealt with or how. John Dew says they're still looking into that.
We hope that there is no one still active that we don't know about. It could be, but the majority of the figures were in the 60s and 70s. It has certainly tapered off.
Survivors say the numbers out today are just the tip of the iceberg, and the Church and the Commission both acknowledge there will be many others who have not lodged complaints. Steve Goodless says today's release of data may signal a change of heart that will make redressing of wrongs easier, but he says the Church is still showing resistance to that.
One would hope that the Church was embarrassed enough to actually go and get cracking with what we would call proper redress, and unfortunately it's not happening.
Today's data shows Christchurch was a hotbed of abuse. Almost a third, or nearly 500 complaints, centred on an orphanage and a trust there run by brothers and Catholic sisters, as well as Maryland's school. The Royal Commission will focus next week in a public hearing on abuse at Maryland's. Christchurch has also been a focus of church payouts, with a whopping $10 million of the $17 million going to victims of just 2 organisations, the St John of God Brothers and the Sisters of Nazareth, that in Christchurch ran St Joseph's Orphanage and Nazareth House, Maryland's Special School and the Hebron Trust.
And that was Phil Pennington reporting. E te iwi e Hariaki nei e a checkpoint. The COVID bogey forces the cancellation of the New Zealand Golf Open. A top New Zealand snowboarder has a new trick in her back pocket for the Winter Olympics. In the crappy situation facing a Christchurch street plagued with thousands of starlings. Homai or whakaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening, including MIQ and rapid antigen tests. Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
Kia ora tātou. The government's boosting its COVID-19 rapid antigen test stock, confirming an extra 36 million tests will be delivered over the next 2 months. That includes 22 million announced last week, which officials are yet to receive a delivery schedule for. Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson says New Zealanders will have access to more than 55 million tests by the end of March. He says modelling suggests 9 million RATs will be used each week at the peak of the Omicron outbreak. Since the government promised in December to allow 200 rural machinery operators into the country to help with the autumn harvest, not one has secured an MIQ spot. The government's tightened border entry because of the Omicron threat. Brooke Nettleton from Bluegrass Contracting in Waikato told Checkpoint that if workers don't arrive in the country within the next fortnight, crops will deteriorate to a point that farmers won't be able to milk their cows. Pregnant New Zealand journalist Charlotte Bellis in Afghanistan, who has complained about not being able to get back into New Zealand, has been granted a spot in MIQ. The government says she's been offered a voucher and flight arrangements. The Peruvian government has ordered a temporary halt to the loading and unloading of tankers at a coastal refinery where a major oil spill occurred 2 weeks ago. The spill was caused when waves from the Tongan tsunami hit a tanker berthed at La Pampilla refinery. The government says the suspension will continue until the Spanish company Repsol provides technical guarantees that there won't be another leak. And train services on the Kapiti line north of Wellington have been suspended because of a scrub fire near Porirua. Metlink is advising those needing to get to Porirua or further north up the coast to delay travel, and Wakakotahi is warning of major delays along State Highway 59. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie, and some more traffic news. A truck has rolled on the Hawke's Bay Expressway at the Taradale Road roundabout, and motorists are being told to use alternative routes. Emergency services were called to the scene just after 3:30 this afternoon. Now, a crane is en route, and when it gets there, the roundabout will be closed. Well, it's time for business now. To Kotaku Hoa in Naianake, or Nicholas Poynton, who is in our Auckland newsroom. Nicholas, let's start with this OECD report, which is, well, it's highlighted some pretty significant deficiencies in the country's digital uptake.
Yeah, hi there, Lisa. Yes, that OECD report, there was talk about how the country needed to rein in debt, tackle housing affordability, inflation, as well as boosting productivity. And it was that latter point that sort of piqued our interest. Productivity is often talked about, but there's very little in the way of solutions. Now, that OECD report notes that the use of advanced digital technology by New Zealand firms is low compared to other member countries. That's because we don't necessarily have we don't have many people going through our universities with advanced ICT skills. We have poor maths achievement rates in schools, and New Zealand employers prefer to employ people from overseas who have more advanced experience. There's not really a pathway there for people to really develop their skills. All of this sort of contributes to a lower adoption and understanding of advanced technology. And New Zealand Tech Chief Executive Graham Muller, he says this report really does reinforce some well-known issues throughout the sector. But he says the government and the business sector are doing things to improve that. He says there's been an big uptake of technology in the past year. That's especially by the smaller firms who, in response to the pandemic, look to digitise their businesses, thinking about how they can move their business online so they can keep operating, keep trading with, the reimposition of lockdowns. He also says there's been positive developments in the policy space where the government is working with industry to try and address some of these issues, but he does note that New Zealand is very different from other countries at the top end of the OECD. That's because we have a lot of dispersed businesses across a large landmass, particularly in the agriculture sector, so we don't necessarily, it's not easy to really compare us to some of our global peers sometimes.
And residential construction sector is told to manage consumers' expectations. Well, what does that mean, Nicholas?
Yeah, well, so we had a story early this morning where builders and suppliers told us that supply shortages throughout the industry are getting a lot worse. That says unprecedented demand runs into shipping delays and hoarding by parts of the sector. Some of those basic materials that builders are struggling to get their hands on include timber, gibboard, concrete, all pretty important stuff if you're trying to build your way out of a housing crisis. And these shortages, they're a key reason why construction costs jumped 16% in the past year. That was according to the latest CPI figures that we got last week from Stats NZ. One supplier, they're telling us that price rises could go up by about 15% across all products in the next year. Build times, he says, in some cases more than doubling. Another supplier we spoke to, Simon Burden from BuildLink, told us there isn't really that much the industry can do at the moment to address these challenges. The causes for for the delays are multifaceted. There's not one simple solution. In his view, what he says the industry needs to do is to be open and transparent right throughout the supply chain about these delays. That's so the end consumer does not have unrealistic expectations. He says that the days of quick builds are over. He says, we're not going to run out of building materials, but people who are planning a project need to be flexible. They need to expect delays. Maybe we could probably liken it to what we're told when we're about to go back into some form of restrictions and everyone rushes out to buy toilet paper. Similar thing could maybe be applied here to the building sector, about people buying what they need and trying to discourage overstocking in parts of it.
Nicholas, let's take a whiz around the markets.
Well, the NZX had a very strong day, up 1.4% or 167 points to 12,059. The dollar is trading at 65.8 US cents and 93.4 Australian.
Ngā mihi, Nicholas ka kite. That's Nicholas Poynton with Business News. Failure of leadership. The damning finding from a probe into parties held at Downing Street during the UK's lockdowns. The long-awaited report says the parties should not have been allowed to take place. Boris Johnson has issued a series of apologies and is clinging on to power, but there's increasing anger from MPs, even within his own party. The BBC's Laura Koonsberg reports.
It's been a long, uncomfortable wait for Number 10. An official verdict into the government itself breaking the rules.
Will you take responsibility, Prime Minister?
There may be no easy Downing Street escape.
Prime Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
He started with another apology.
Firstly, I want to say sorry. And I'm sorry for the things we simply didn't get right, and also sorry for the way that this matter has been handled. And it's no use saying that this or that was within the rules, and it's no use saying that people were working hard. This pandemic was hard for everyone.
His penance, though, not changing his own address, but shifting others around.
Mr. Speaker, it isn't enough to say sorry. This is a moment when we must look at ourselves in the mirror and we must learn. We are making changes now to the way Downing Street and the Cabinet Office run, so that we can get on with the job that I was elected to do, Mr. Speaker, and the job that this government was elected to do. Mr. Speaker, I get it, and I will fix it.
The findings are grim for Downing Street. Ms Gray found a serious failure to observe the high standards expected, with too little thought given to what was happening across the country. There were failures of leadership and judgment by different parts of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office. She found excessive consumption of alcohol that's not appropriate in a professional workplace at any time. And some staff who'd wanted to raise concerns about behaviours felt unable to do so. This may not be the full and final version, but the conclusion is clear. A number of these gatherings should not have been allowed to take place or to develop in the way they did.
It's 20 to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muriaki na pita pita kōrero. After the news at 6, the OECD says our economy is overheating. So will the government adopt any of the recommendations aimed at hosing it down? 2 years into the pandemic, and with Omicron expected to be widespread in the community soon, New Zealanders are adapting to a new normal. Our reporter Somya Bamidi-Pati and Samuel Rillstone took to Oriental Bay in Wellington to ask people how they were trying to manage the risk of transmission.
It's another warm day in the capital, and the city's most central beach has been packed with people. But while many are conscious of COVID-19, most say life has to go on.
Main thing is to have your phone, your vaccination pass and your mask. They're the three essentials. Wear it on public transport, wear it going into shop, be prepared to be seated at a restaurant and waited on the table, and keep to wide open spaces.
Just got to make sure I got my phone so I can scan and show my pass, and that's when I've got the masks in the car, and that's about it. Yeah, and we didn't take any sanitizer or try and avoid, people. I mean, we're not going close to people, but we wouldn't have done that with or without COVID, just give people a wee bit of privacy. we just try to live as normal as possible.
While it seems to be about maintaining a sense of normality for now, that could change if Omicron becomes widespread in the community.
I've only got one lung, so I really don't want to get Omicron. I know people say it's mild, but who defines mild? So I don't want it.
Yeah, I think it'll change a bit, not too much, but yeah, as Jess said, we're going to be having to live with COVID. It's going to be around us. We're just going to have to get used to it, used to wearing masks more often and being wary.
Local epidemiologist Michael Baker says people should consider the risk of transmission no matter where they're going and what they're doing, and take the usual precautions.
Well, I think it's just important to think about or get good at risk assessment and risk management for us as individuals. I mean, the government is doing a lot for us, but increasingly when Omicron becomes widely distributed in the New Zealand population, unfortunately, we're all going to have to get better at doing this. And I think most people know the sensible precautions, and obviously starting with vaccination and booster doses and mask use, that's useful. And then just thinking about your patterns of meeting other people who are outside your normal group.
Across the Tasman, more than 50% of Omicron cases were in young adults when the variant was at its peak. But this local teen told us she's conscious of trying to balance COVID precautions with meeting friends and socialising.
I've been to a few house parties, but they've never been more than 50 people. And if I do see that it looks like it is getting a lot bigger, I'm like, you know what, this isn't, I can just go now. I think teenagers are trying to make sure that they do get to experience all the stuff that older people have told them what it's like to be a teenager, and being able to party and everything. And because of COVID, I didn't get a school ball last year, I didn't get a leavers celebration, but I think we're just trying to make the most of it and make sure that it doesn't impact us too much and we still try and have fun, I guess.
Epidemiologists are recommending people reduce the spread of COVID by avoiding closed spaces, crowded places and close contact settings.
And the video filmed by Samuel Rillstone for that story will be on our webpage. The New Zealand Open's been wanked into the long grass, with the golf tournament organisers having to pull the pin under the red light. Under red, events can only have up to 100 people, meaning the Golf Opens, set down for March in Queenstown, was over the limit. Tournament chairman John Hart joins me now. John, this is pretty disappointing. Was it a line call or there was just no way you could do it?
No, we've been obviously doing everything we can, Lisa, to hold the tournament, but in light of the government restrictions around entry at the border and red light, there were just too many uncertainties, and we could be given no certainty on those key issues, and so in the end it became a decision which was one we just had to make. Very sad, because it's the tournament's in great space and it was set to be something very special this year. So a very difficult day for us all.
You say you couldn't get certainty around some key issues. Certainty from whom?
Oh, well, in the end, we had to work with government to see whether we could, hold the event, and we couldn't get certainty to the answers we required from government to allow us to proceed.
So were they not very helpful, John?
Oh, I think, government agencies are under a lot of pressure and they did what they could. But at the moment, we're caught like other people are in terms of border restrictions, and we're caught like other people are in working within the red light traffic system.
Did you have MIQ spots for players?
No, well, we were actually an exempt event, so we were one of those events that could have brought players directly in, and at the time, pre-Christmas, we were looking at self-isolation, but that went off the table as a result of the change with the Omicron outburst, and that went off the table, so we were having to renegotiate all of that, and again, there was no certainty, so we just couldn't take the risk of holding on any longer.
What do you reckon, given your experience, the future of events this year is then?
I'm concerned for the future of events. I think events are really important in terms of the well-being of the country and the feel-good factor that they bring and the enjoyment factor they bring. I mean, and we've seen the events history is going through carnage. this year as a result of the COVID restrictions, and at some stage that's got to stop. But it's very difficult to run events under this current restrictions, government restrictions that COVID brings.
How hard do you reckon it's going to be to get these players back? Ones that we've coaxed down under for a few years. Now they've had a couple of years away from us. Is it going to be easy to get them back?
Well, we've had some fantastic responses today. I have to say, I've spent the last 24 hours speaking with all our major sponsors who primarily 6 of them are international and 3 or 4 of them are New Zealand. And without doubt, every one of them has rolled over their commitment from 222 to 223. And I've got no doubt that the pros, we've had so many texts today from pros around the world and Asia, particularly in Australia, who are gutted that the tournament's not on, because they really love coming to Queenstown. They love coming to this particular event because it's been one that really looks after the people that are in the tournament. So I'm very confident indeed that even though we've had a 2 years gap, 2023 we'll have a strong field and an exciting tournament.
What's the knock-on effect for cancelling for the region? Because I imagine this is big bucks that it brings in.
Oh, well, it's got obviously economic benefit to the region, which is directly lost, which is probably, in the $4 million. Last year's tournament would have been a minimum, and it's probably more. So, it has an impact on the region, and it's sad in that the region has suffered a lot in the last 2 years. And I think they were looking at this tournament as giving them some uplift, a big week with a lot of people coming into town. But sadly, that all won't happen now, and I do feel for Queenstown, who've been strong supporters of our tournament.
John, are you eligible for any of the government insurances or any other insurances in terms of this event?
No, unfortunately we're not, and that means the losses, which are considerable, will have to be withstood by our underwriters, Millbrook Resort.
Really appreciate your time this evening, John. Thanks for joining us. That's John Hart talking there about the New Zealand Golf Open had to be cancelled because of the red traffic light setting restrictions. New Zealand snowboarder Zoe Sadowski-Synnott has revealed she has a new trick she wants to bring out at the Beijing Winter Olympics, which start later this week. But the conditions may not allow her to try it. The 20-year-old is the in-form freeboarder heading into the Games after picking up 2 gold medals at the recent X Games in Colorado. Sadowski-Synnott will compete in both the slope style and big air events over the next week, with her first run on Saturday. The 20-year-old won bronze in the big air in Pyeongchang 4 years ago. She landed a couple of new tricks at the X Games and told Glenn Lama she needed to bring those out then rather than saving them for the Olympics.
For me in snowboarding, I guess it's practice makes perfect, and I use comps to give me that push to push myself and try harder and do better. And so I kind of needed these to be able to tell myself that I can do it. And then when it comes to the Olympics, I just need to just have that same mindset, and the rest will work itself out. But coming in, I know there's a lot of other girls as well who are capable of doing a crazy run. So, we'll just have to wait and see.
Have you got something else up your sleeve, Zoe, that you want to kind of nail for the first time in Beijing?
Possibly. It really depends on the training opportunities and if I get a chance to really... with the right conditions and the right timing to be able to do this one trick that I want to do, but I don't know if it's there yet, so just going to have to see if the opportunity arises.
How do you think these gold medals and the form in the World Cups that you've shown as well, how do these set you up for Beijing, Zoe, knowing that, that you could become the first New Zealander to win a gold medal at a Winter Olympics?
Yeah, it's pretty surreal going into the Olympics coming off 2 X Games gold medals, because I never expected to be in this position, and it's such a switch flip from last time round going into South Korea. But yeah, I guess I just have the tricks that I can do, and I'll bring them to Beijing, and if it works out, it works out. Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see.
Are you hearing anything about the conditions that you might encounter in Beijing? And if so, Zoe, how are they going to differ from what you've experienced in the States in recent couple of months?
We know that it's going to be cold, and that is going to be pretty different to what we've had recently in America, but we've been doing our research and making sure that we're staying warm because it's pretty hard to snowboard when it's freezing out. Like, if you know how it feels to jump off a swing set when it's cold out and you get ground shock on your feet, it's kind of like that, but in your whole body when you're trying to do tricks on a snowboard. So, yeah, I guess we just have to stay warm and hope for the best.
So when it's colder like you've just described, Zoe, does it make it more challenging for you, does it?
I think it makes it more challenging for everyone. It's really important to stay warm when you're doing these tricks, and, you know, your body doesn't work too well when it's too cold. So I think it's meant to be -20, maybe even -30. So a lot colder than conditions in New Zealand and a lot colder than most of the conditions we experience in America.
We all know that we haven't won a gold medal at the Winter Olympics before, Zoe. You know, what would it mean to you if you were able to achieve it?
Honestly, I'm mostly thinking about the tricks I want to do and let the results figure themselves out, just because that's always what I've done in the past, and to win a gold would be absolutely insane, and it would mean so much to me, but there's so many other girls who are capable of beating me, and I can't really call it out right now.
Zoe Sadowski-Sinnott talking to Glenn Lama there. Pregnant journalist Charlotte Ballas has confirmed she will be taking the emergency MIQ spot she's been allocated. The government announced late this afternoon it had a spot for her and was working on flight arrangements. Ms Ballas has tweeted her response to MB, saying she will be back at the beginning of March. She says the whole process has been stressful and she's disappointed it had to come to this. A group of Christchurch residents are crying out for help dealing with a pretty crappy situation plaguing their neighbourhood. Families living on Dudley Street say thousands of birds nesting in trees above their homes are covering their properties in poo, prompting concerns of a public health hazard. Becca Hughes lives there with her husband and 2 children and says they're trying everything they can to keep their place clean, but to no avail.
It's right up our driveway, across our cars, all over across our windows, and it's now this year it started on the back deck as well, so it's right up the driveway, and we can clean the cars over a weekend like most people do, and by Wednesday or Thursday they look like abandoned vehicles, and I've actually had that comment taken it into one of the cars in to get valeted because we were selling it, and we were asked how long it had been sitting, and it had been maybe a week since it had been cleaned, but they honestly thought it was an abandoned vehicle because the amount of bird droppings. Friends will come and park for one evening, and the next day they'll come and collect their car, and it's just covered in bird droppings if they're parked out on the road.
So how do you gap it from the car to the house then?
You dash. You make the dash. We've got a young family, as I say. We've got a 1-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, and if we go out for a walk with the dog, we cover them in the pram and we dash to the end of the street until and it's as soon as the trees stop, the problem stops. It's no longer an issue.
So you're basically talking about a shower of poo, yeah?
Yeah, pretty much. You make the dash, yeah.
What does it smell like? What could you liken it to?
It's a farmyard. It's horrible. I mean, we're in an area that's the earthquake has affected our culverts and our guttering, and the road hasn't been resurfaced yet. And we know that's happening in June, but our gutterings get clogged with water and leaves, and so the stagnant water then has stagnant poo in it, and it's just horrendous. You pull your windows up as you drive over the entrance to our driveway. It's not nice. I check the mailbox from the car. I don't run out. It's not worth it.
So are you happy for the kids to play in the yard, or what's your feelings on that?
Up until now, the back garden's fine, and we could deal with it to, you know, a certain extent. You know, we do live in a tree-lined avenue. You take the beauty for the pain sometimes, but it's just how we pray for days of rain once a week to wash it away from the street, because we can wash our property, but there's nothing we can do from the street and the whole aspect of the street there.
So, Becca, what do you want from the council? You are washing down your house and your footpath and your kids and your pram and all the rest of it and your car. What do you need from the council?
A response would be nice to start with. We've submitted Snap it, Send it, Solve it. We've emailed them directly. We've been to community board meetings. We've had a community board member at the house, and they've just said it's not their responsibility, and now they refuse to come back to us. Or if we ring, we get pushed pillar to post, and we speak to four or five different departments. The trees are their problem, and they recognise that, and therefore the birds roosting there are their problem. And so cleaning the street would be a start. A long-term risk management plan, or an understanding of, is it actually a health hazard? We don't know. Is it endangering our children? Or is it just a hygiene, cleanliness thing? We honestly, we're in the dark, and they're not helping.
To be clear, Becca, you are not suggesting that the trees be razed to the ground, are you?
No, absolutely not. And I would be really disappointed if that was the case. And they're lovely, and it's just through 10 years of neglect, post earthquakes, they haven't been maintained and they haven't been managed, and they've become so dense that the starlings can continue to come home to roost and grow and grow and grow in number.
So you've got a bit of a Hitchcock situation here, except it's starlings.
Yes, and I think people who must drive past much think we're in the Hitchcock situation when we go to the end of the driveway and you bat on a pan with a wooden spoon, because apparently that disperses them. We're following all the old wives' tales we can find to try and get rid of them. We've got an owl on the roof, a little plastic owl. There's someone a few doors down has a little kite that they fly on their rooftop. The whole street is trying whatever they can to get rid of them.
So, Becky, you're basically, in essence, beating a drum outside to scare them off.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's crowdsource this. Let's see if we can get someone to get in touch with a solution for you and see what we can come up with.
Yeah, that would be brilliant.
And that's Becca Hughes from Dudley Street in Christchurch, overrun by starlings and the poop. So if you've got any legal, practical ideas for how to solve that, do get in touch. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Lots of you getting in touch about MIQ, agriculture sector needing heavy machinery operators. This listener says a country that can't get its harvest in or plant its fields is in big trouble. Shouldn't food security be the government's first responsibility as servants of the people?
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The government has confirmed enough rapid antigen tests to test all New Zealanders twice a week will be delivered by the end of March. The Deputy Prime Minister, Grant Robertson, says over the weekend officials secured an additional 36 million tests for delivery over the next 2 months. Those tests are on top of the almost 17 million already confirmed for delivery in February and the 5 million already in the country. He says rapid antigen tests will be used more frequently as Omicron cases increase.
Modelling on the use of rapid antigen tests through the outbreak suggests that during the peak we will likely be using 9 million rapid antigen tests a week, which is the equivalent to testing a quarter of New Zealand every day or all of New Zealand twice a week.
A total of 123 million rapid antigen tests have been ordered through to June. The Prime Minister will deliver a speech on Thursday where she's expected to lay out a clear timeline for the border reopening. RNZ understands Cabinet Ministers discussed the plan when they met earlier today. A staged timeline was outlined late last year but was quickly pushed back due to the risk of Omicron. The latest plan states that from the end of February, vaccinated New Zealanders in Australia and possibly elsewhere will be allowed to skip MIQ and isolate at home. A COVID-19 modeller says infections in the community are moving slightly slower than they have in Omicron outbreaks overseas. 126 new infections were reported in 11 regions today. But the University of Canterbury's Michael Planck warns case numbers could still take off. Professor Planck says daily cases are about 4 times higher than a week ago and continuing to grow, with a doubling time of about 4 days. He says that pace could also reflect fact that public health measures to slow the spread are working. The Ministry of Health believes Omicron is now the dominant COVID-19 variant. COVID-19 has already found its way into a school as many students return for the first proper day back in the classroom. A staff member at Otahuhu College has tested positive for the virus and others have been forced into isolation as close contacts. Principal Neil Watson says it's just a new reality the school has to deal with.
Would have been nice to have had the first day without it, but that's just the way it is, and so it's just a matter of making sure we've got plans in place, doing the best we can.
Bulla residents are preparing for rain similar to the amount that caused flooding and widespread destruction last July. Met Service issued a red warning for the region today. More than 690 millimetres of rain fell on parts of the west coast in under 72 hours last July. Mayor Jamie Klein says there are people who have yet to recover from last year's flooding.
That's very fresh in people's minds, and there's no doubt about that. That's a clear cause of additional anxiety as these sort of news events unfold. So we're very conscious of that. Our flood recovery hub was put on notice early this morning that to expect increased inquiry and anxiety levels from the clients that they're working with.
An emergency operations centre has opened in Westport and another in Hokitika. A lawyer for the Royal Commission on Abuse in State Care and Faith-Based Institutions says new data on abuse by Catholic clergy is startling and sobering. The Church has, for the first time, collated national figures that show 1,100 survivors have laid nearly 1,700 complaints against about 600 clergy since 1950. A Commission lawyer, Catherine Anderson, says children's heartbreaking stories are behind the startling figures. The Church says having the information in one place for the first time will help with redress, and further analysis is being done into how perpetrators were or were not held to account. The British police say they're reviewing more than 300 photos and 500 pages of information as they investigate whether parties held at government offices broke COVID regulations. Civil servant Sue Gray, who led an internal investigation, says she can't release her full inquiry until the police complete theirs. The BBC's Helen Catt has more.
Sue Gray said that at least some of the gatherings represented a serious failure to observe the standards expected of the entire British population at the time, and that there had been failures of leadership and judgment. In the Commons, Boris Johnson said he was sorry, adding we must look in the mirror and learn. He announced structural changes would be made in Downing Street. But he rejected a suggestion by his predecessor, Theresa May, that Sue Gray's report showed that Number 10 had not been following the rules they had set for everyone else.
And a scrub fire beside State Highway 59 north of Wellington is now under control and all lanes and train tracks have reopened. The fire between the Titahi Bay on-off ramp and the Kapiti train link started about 4 p.m. and closed traffic ramps and train tracks. All have now reopened, but Waka Kotahi says people should expect significant delays as traffic heading north remains congested. Train services have also resumed on Wellington's Kapiti line, but travellers are being told to expect delays and possible cancellations. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tony Stamp samples the latest from Chan Marshall, aka Cat Power. We've got a window on the world of games and why play is just as important for adults as it is for children. While our international relations specialist Nina Hall, assistant professor at Johns Hopkins University, surveys the global scene. Does she think war in Ukraine is imminent? Or is that just a game too? On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint shortly. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Significant heavy rain for the South Island's west coast starting tomorrow. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo, often cloudy with a few showers or drizzle patches. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumarunui and Taranaki, fine and cloudy periods, chance of a light shower. For Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, also Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine fine and hot with high cloud at times. Marlborough and Nelson, cloud increasing, rain developing tomorrow, possibly heavy later. For Buller, Westland and Fiordland, also the headwaters of Canterbury and Otago lakes and rivers. Cloud increasing with rain developing late today. Heavy rain and thunderstorms for most places is expected tomorrow, but especially in Westland, then in Buller from the afternoon. For the remainder of Canterbury and Otago, also for Southland, cloudy periods, scattered rain developing tonight, possible thunderstorms tomorrow afternoon and evening for Southland and Clutha, and for the Chatham Islands, mainly fine. It's just gone 7 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora e hono mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A stark warning from the OECD. The economy is hot, hot, hot. So hot, it's starting to overheat. With soaring inflation and runaway house prices. It wants the government to rein it in and has released a raft of recommendations on how to do so. But not all of the suggestions have been well received. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
As far as report cards go, New Zealand could do a lot worse than this. From the OECD boss, Matthias Cormann.
The New Zealand economy has recovered strongly from the COVID-19 pandemic, and there have been very few coronavirus-related deaths.
We've had a strong bounce back from COVID-19 in 2020 and into 2021.
Unemployment at a record low, GDP at pre-pandemic levels, and a positive near-term outlook. But don't celebrate too soon.
We've got an economy that's doing really well, but we're probably doing a little bit too well when you head into that overheating category.
The independent economist Cameron Bagri says the COVID-19 response has spurred eye-watering house prices and growing debt levels. Annual inflation is nearing 6%, a 30-year high. The OECD wants the government to shift strategy, and quickly.
They're telling the government to basically rein things in. Yeah, and if they don't rein things in, we're going to see more pressure on monetary policy. That's the Reserve Bank to lift interest rates.
And the National Party's Simon Bridges hopes the Finance Minister Grant Robertson will take heed.
Actually, I hope he doesn't go and say, no, I know everything. My borrow and spend model is just fine. There's no issue here. Actually, there are issues.
The government will remain conscious of ensuring that our spending is careful and that it is targeted.
The OECD predicts growth will slow from about 4.7% last year to as low as 2.5% in 2023. It outlines a long list of risks to the economy, a delayed border reopening, a housing crash, a sharp slowdown in China. And for its fifth consecutive report, it's urged an increase in the superannuation age, warning the rising cost will become unsustainable.
I certainly respect the view of the OECD in proposing this, but it is a clear policy commitment that New Zealand heard from our government, and it won't be one that we're going back on.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has pledged to resign before hiking the pension age, as did former PM Sir John Key. It's a point of difference with National, which has a policy to gradually increase the age of eligibility to 67 over 15 years. At least that's the policy for now.
You know what our position has been in the past. In the end, I think those are matters for the leader.
At this stage, we stick with that policy, but I want a chance to be able to read that report later.
It certainly makes for some provocative reading for government and opposition alike.
The squeeze on MIQ spots has put the squeeze on the agricultural industry, desperate for overseas workers to take up roles as skilled machinery operators. The government announced in December 200 MIQ vouchers would be available for skilled machinery operators to help with the busy autumn harvest. But that's fast approaching, and so far not a single worker has managed to secure an MIQ voucher. Earlier in the program, we heard from Brooke Nettleton from Bluegrass Contracting in Waikato. He warned of dire consequences if workers don't arrive in the country within the next week. We're talking about heavy machinery operators here. We wanted to speak with Agricultural Minister Damien O'Connor, but he declined to be interviewed. Joining us now is Rural Contractors New Zealand Southland Board member Daryl Thompson. Hi Daryl, how many workers from overseas are you after, and to fill what roles?
We applied for two to operate loaders for the end of the season.
And any joy?
No, because we've been told that they're not going to get here until the middle of March at the earliest, more likely to be the end of March at the earliest, and it's just too late for us.
Darryl, how widespread is that problem for your area?
huge. It's been a huge issue right from for the last 2 seasons, to be fair.
Tell us about that. How big a problem, how many workers, and what happens if you don't get them?
We usually would bring in 15 experienced operators from overseas. The last 2 years, last year we got 4, this year we got 3. And they're invaluable, those guys that come in, because they know what they're doing, they know how to look after gear and go onto farms and achieve a good result. We have been forced, I suppose, is the word, to employ people that are just not suitable for the role. Some are, don't get me wrong. Every year there's gems, the people that have diesel in their veins or agricultural backgrounds. Some of those young guys are coming through, do very, very well, and will keep doing very, 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 very well. But there's people that think that they want to have a go at it, they have a go at it, and the amount of damage that's being caused in clients' properties, machinery, expensive machinery, it's just putting a huge amount of pressure on everybody.
Daryl, you'll appreciate that we've got a lot of feedback since we spoke to Brooke earlier in the program, right? People want to know why New Zealanders haven't been trained to do the job. And I'm just going to read you a bit of feedback and see if you can answer that directly. One listener says primary industries, including dairy and fishing, etc., have been employing cheap overseas labour for years and only have themselves to blame. And this one saying, I wonder how many local people you've tried to train. They don't even advertise for staff in the country. Same with farm labourers. All they want is cheap, compliant workers. It's shameful. What is your response to that?
I would say that that's complete and utter rubbish, because of mine, and I know that other contractors in Southland especially do advertise each year. We train those that want to be trained each year, and some of those stick around for a long time. Anybody that walks into my office and says that I want to be a tractor driver, usually is the first cab off the rank to take up a position. And people that want to do it and are capable of doing it are a lot easier to have around in your area, because you don't have to find accommodation for them. All of those things, they're there. They have New Zealand bank accounts and IRD numbers. They're set up, and they usually have a background of where they're living in stable places.
So, Daryl, if you could get Kiwis that were able to do the jobs, you would take them first. That's what you want.
Definitely. I mean, everybody, and we do, and we have done every year since, for the last 25 years, anybody that's wanted to is able to get a position. But now we're getting people that are just thinking that they might have a go at it.
So they're not committed to it?
No. And as far as the wage rate goes, that's been set by government for people that we've been wanting to bring back for a second year. We had an approval of principle process. Now that rate was set by immigration, not us, and it's just that's what I suppose the norm was. Whatever was on that contract was what people were being paid.
Right, so you're talking about international wages for bringing the workers in, Daryl, but what about paying local people? Do you pay enough? Is it a salary? Is it an hourly rate? Give us an idea.
It's an hourly rate, and sometimes people were doing between 80 hours a week, an hourly rate. It's usually based around the minimum wage. So I've never paid anyone on minimum wage, because they might as well be on the dole. So usually they're $1 or $2 above minimum wage for someone that's just learning the industry. And as they go on, it goes up. And as they get more experience, it goes up. And quite often it goes up 2 or 3 times in a season as people move up the ranks or move up to the responsibilities and the equipment that they're doing.
Daryl, is 80 hours a week the problem? Because that's a huge number.
Yeah, it is, but it doesn't happen all the time. It just is times, especially in Southland, we get weather pressure. And it hasn't happened this season. We've been extremely lucky with the weather down there, but usually we get weather pressure where we only get short windows to work in. So out of a week of 7 days, we might work 4 or 3. And sometimes they're 15-hour days. And it's real easy to get a 15-hour day in.
So What do you think of the government's response then? Because we did ask Damien O'Connor onto the program. He declined to be interviewed, but has issued us with a statement, which we'll get to in a minute. But basically, they say they're trying to work with you, and that's why they've made these 200 border class exemptions for 2022, and that Immigration New Zealand, well, it's issued the relevant instruction on the 21st of January. So they're working on it, basically, is their response. What do you make of how they have responded?
Well, it was the 12th of December that they told us we could bring 200 in. So if we could bring that 200 in the middle of January, the start of January, middle of January, to be here, to be working in the end of January, it would have been very, very appreciative, and everybody would have been very, very happy. And there'd be quite a big number coming in. I guess there was over the Christmas and New Year period where probably everybody went on holiday. Some people went on holiday that may have been in charge. That's a guess, because we had no contact for a fair period of time. They come back in January, middle of January, and say, yeah, you'll get them in at the end of March. Well, that's just too late.
If someone's listening and is experienced in driving heavy machinery, sell the job to us.
It's a job where you sit in an air-conditioned cab with a radio, and quite often the tractor or machine operates itself, steers itself. You have to have diesel in your veins. You have to be prepared to go onto a farm and operate the machine, do the job, and move on and keep going. Sometimes that day will involve 10, 12 hours. Sometimes might be a 15 if there's a weather event coming in. But you quite often your own boss, or you're working in a group with a heap of other enjoyable people to be around, and it's an industry that most operators are becoming 12 to 12 month positions. Not everybody can keep a full number on, but if you're the right person, you'll get a full-time position quite easily.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Daryl Thompson, who's a Southland board member for Rural Contractors New Zealand. So there you go. They're looking for heavy machinery operators. As I mentioned, we did ask the Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor on the program. He declined to be interviewed, but did provide us with a statement. He says, we've been well aware of the challenges for rural contractors and have been working with them for a couple of years in addressing them. Hence getting the 200 border class exemptions in 2022 that was announced in December, along with 125 for 2021. Omicron has cut across what was a good plan, he says. In the face of that, we're working with the sector to get machinery operators through the border as soon as possible and in time for the peak of the autumn harvest. Immigration New Zealand issued the relevant instruction on 21st of January, from which point visa applications have been able to be made. It is almost 6:20. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A downward trend in the number of rangatahi in the youth justice system has been cautiously welcomed. The number of youth offenders has more than halved in the past decade, but with disparities for Māori still there, those in the sector say there's still plenty more work to do. JB Tahana reports.
In the past decade, the number of youth offenders has fallen by more than 60%. It's a downward trend welcomed by the Children's Commissioner, Frances Evers.
Oh, look, it's great that the numbers have come down, and we noticed that sitting in the courts. It's been a combination, really, of a lot of work that's gone in from all of the various stakeholders that has, I think, helped bring offending down, which is great because we don't really want young people in court.
Māori barrister Kingi Snelga calls it a sign of progress.
I think what the results highlight is that our youth justice system does work. There are good things about it. Obviously, it's not perfect because it still disproportionately affects Māori.
Even though the number of Māori youth offenders halved between 2017 and 2021, offending rates are 6 times higher than for non-Māori. Judge Evers says that disparity isn't good enough and more needs to be done, particularly before they reach the adult system.
Early intervention is key, absolutely key. So it's giving them strength, it's giving them the tools to make good choices because, most of these rangatahi, they come from really difficult circumstances.
Judge Evers says it involves enabling whānau and Māori providers. She hopes reforms to oranga tamariki and how the police deal with rangatahi will also help. Kingi Snelga says there are still a lot of things that need fixing, But he says it's positive that years of efforts to create change, such as the creation of rangatahi courts or greater use of diversion, may be having an effect. He asks why successful approaches aren't being applied more widely.
You know, the adult system, why hasn't that kind of followed in the same trajectory? So obviously there is still the disproportionate outcomes for Māori, but there are positives in the sense that our youth court is very good at rehabilitation and addressing the underlying causes of the offending.
The Principal Youth Court Judge, John Walker, says more research is needed into the trend.
There's a lot of people doing a lot of work, and prevention is the key. But just exactly what's been done well and what's working is what we really do need to identify.
He says it's important that good progress is seized upon.
Beijing residents are largely welcoming the Winter Olympics this week, despite COVID measures shutting them out from the Games. Controversy abroad about China's human rights record and diplomatic boycotts aren't in focus, as a city of 22 million welcomes Olympians for the second time in 14 years. The ABC's Bill Birtles reports.
At a Beijing ice skating park, 63-year-old Zhang Jianguo is teaching his 3-year-old granddaughter to skate. I like ice skating, she says, and her grandfather says he's planning to watch the sport at the Olympics.
I'm very happy to welcome friends from all over the world to know about the Chinese people. Whether it's Winter or Summer Olympics, it's sport, and we love it.
Mr. Zhang will have to watch the skating on TV. As thousands of athletes and team members arrive in Beijing ahead of Friday's opening ceremony, they're entering a forbidden city within the Chinese capital. Hotels that are fenced off and guarded, buses that shuttle the foreigners straight to the Olympic venues. 19-year-old student Wang Man says the measures make her feel safe.
I think the pandemic is a global issue that no one can avoid, but China has worked very hard to control the virus spread and to host a very safe Olympic Games.
Ms Wang was in primary school the last time Beijing held an Olympics in the northern summer of 2008. And Australia's decision, along with several Western allies, to diplomatically boycott the Games over multiple human rights concerns isn't on the 19-year-old's mind.
I think China's relations with other countries now, compared to 2008, are generally much better. Our country has developed, and now we can help many other countries.
Chinese officials have said 2008 introduced modern China to the world, whereas this year is about showcasing China's global achievements. The economy is more than 3 times bigger than it was in 2008. Chinese tourists surged threefold in the decade after the Games and became the biggest overseas group to visit Australia and many other countries. But COVID has shut China's borders and stopped the flow of tourists and students. International sites like Google and Facebook that could be accessed in 2008 have all been blocked, and the government is fanning an increasingly triumphant form of nationalism through education and the media. Independent Beijing commentator Wu Qiang says the Winter Games are taking place at an extraordinary time.
In the past decade, China's politics has completely changed. It's hard for the international community to imagine, even though they've seen China's more aggressive posture. China is now in unprecedented isolation before the Winter Olympics, and the nationalism inside China is becoming stronger and stronger.
Back at the ice skating park, people all agree one change has definitely affected them. That China hosting the Winter Games encouraged them to take to the ice.
The shape of the ocean floor influences weather patterns like tsunamis, tides and swell, and plays a key role in climate change, especially in Antarctica. But less than 20% of the global seabed has been mapped by research vessels, and Australian scientists are determined to boost that figure. The ABC's Henry Ballow reports.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're now entering into another quiet period that will last for approximately 30 minutes.
Captain Jerry O'Doherty is putting a 26,000-tonne ship into stealth mode.
Do not slam doors, do not operate the toilet system.
All noise must be silenced as the ship listens to echoes from the ocean floor. But inside a small room deep in the hull, scientists can't contain their excitement.
Now we're really getting into it.
For the first time, they're recording a 3D map of a mountain in the Southern Ocean.
Crossed it.
Halfway between Hobart and Antarctica, the summit is taller than Mount Kosciuszko, but still 500 metres below sea level.
No one had been over the top of it.
Floyd Howard is an acoustics officer on the ship. He's using a tool called multi-beam sonar.
So it sends out a fan of sound underneath the ship, and then we measure how long it takes for that sound to bounce off the sea floor.
This technology has also led to a crucial discovery on the Antarctic coast. Lloyd Simmons is the voyage leader.
What we've found is an immense canyon underneath the Vanderford Glacier, which wasn't previously known to be there.
The Vanderford Glacier is an enormous ice sheet slowly sliding into the Southern Ocean. As the ocean temperature rises due to climate change, water is melting this ice from below, raising the global sea level.
One of the issues with Antarctic glaciers at the moment is them being eaten away from the underneath by warmer water coming down from the north.
A 3-kilometre canyon underneath the ice may be melting the glacier faster than anyone realised, with more ice exposed to water. These two discoveries will now be shared with the scientific community, including with glaciologists now on their way to study the Vanderford.
We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about our own planet.
Dr. Jonathan Cool is the manager of the Australian Antarctic Data Centre. He's part of the global effort to map all of the ocean's floor by 2030.
It's difficult because often we use light in order to understand what's going on, whereas with the oceans, we have to use sound.
This is expensive and time-consuming work. Many believe the 2030 goal is too ambitious, but are trying anyway.
I think that this is the way for us to make as best of a beginning as we can.
A lot of you have been getting in touch about our earlier interview. This is about residents on Dudley Street in Christchurch facing, well, thousands of starlings and a plague of poo from said birds, and we decided to crowdsource a solution. You've been most helpful. Here are some of your suggestions. This listener says they grew up on Dudley Street and have one word to say about the starling issue: karerea. It's a native falcon who has very sharp talons and likes to eat birds. Scary. Someone else says a laser bird scarer. They use one on a small vineyard and say it's brilliant. This listener reckons find the danger cry for the starling and play it over a megaphone periodically. They do it in European cities for the same problem. Which would be worse, the poo problem or some screeching bird on high rotate? I'm not sure about that. Another suggestion is use thin strips of silver foil. Perhaps a survival blanket is a suggestion, with bells tied to the ends, and that should help solve some of the issues. Someone says, how about getting a predatory bird? Maybe that's an eagle, but that would be necessary to import them. They say also owl shrieks played over a loudspeaker, similar to birds, dissuades birds from airport runways. That's a good one too. Another person says there is a bird scaring frequency, but apparently they reckon it makes young kids feel ill as well. So hopefully one of those suggestions will help. That's about all we've got time for. The Late News team will keep you updated throughout the night. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi o Pōpō. On first up from 5 a.m. tomorrow, they discover a new player on the world stage of combat sports. Yes, professional pillow fighting. It is a real thing. Tune in.
RNZ News headlines. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. The government says enough rapid antigen tests to test all New Zealanders twice a week will be delivered by the end of March. The Prime Minister will deliver a speech on Thursday where she's expected to lay out a clear timeline for reopening the border. Organisers of the WOMAD Festival in New Plymouth in March say they're proceeding with extreme caution and won't be able to make a final decision on whether the event will go ahead until later this month. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
I've been wondering, am I a good person?